Slice of Sci-Fi.
Hello and hi, welcome to another Slice of Sci-Fi. I am Summer Brooks, and today we are here to talk about a groundbreaking graphic novel, Ancestral Recall, the collected trade paperback edition of the 5-issue series that came out in 2025. With me today are writer Jordan Clark and illustrator, artist Atagun Ílhan. Oh, literally had a who's who of iconic comics names associated with this series and this book, and I am curious to find out where this came from and if we're going to eventually get more, because this is a lovely book. This collected edition is truly gorgeous. The story is thought-provoking and compelling, and the art, it gets a little crazy in a couple places, but it really fits the story to my opinion. So Jordan Adigan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi.
So talk about Ancestral Recall, where this story came from and how you guys approached the best way to tell this story.
What do you think, Atagun? Am I going? Are you going?
I feel like you should start it because you had the ball rolling first and foremost. Yeah.
Yeah. So Atagun and I were fortunate enough to be a part of the Milestone Initiative, which was put together by DC Comics and Milestone Comics. And great experience. You know, we got to meet a lot of really incredible artists and creatives, not only, you know, professionals and legends, you know, like Dennis Cowan and Reginald Hudland, but also each other. And so we went out to the DC headquarters for like a week, where we did like some workshops and, you know, a bunch of other things. And Atagun and I were in the same, I guess, like group cohort, you know, for a couple of the different projects. And so one of the things that we did was create like a villain and a hero. If we had like our ideal like milestone characters. And so I created a villain, which is like we were in a larger group, so it was like you get to choose one villain and one hero. So like they went with the villain that I made, but the hero that I came up with was kind of like the prototype for Melvin, who was like this person who could tap into Black history as a superpower. And so during that time, I don't know, you probably weren't paying attention to this Atagun, but like there were a couple times where we were just like downstairs in the hotel area, and Atagun would always have a sketchbook and like just be working on something, either something for the program or just his own stuff. And I was just like, man, I'd love to work with Atagun. Like I got a chance to just do something, because you know, his work has both, you know, like just this incredible you know, spirit to it. Like it feels like it's just moving and like fluid on the page, but also just like his attention to detail is incredible. So you know, I was just like the whole time like, man, it would be so cool to work with that again. And so I got a chance to pitch a story to Ahoy Comics, which is based in Syracuse. At the time, Atagun was finishing his MFA in Syracuse.
Still here. Still here. Left.
And so it kind of all felt like it came together, just like meeting him through you know, the Milestone Initiative, and then, you know, the Syracuse connection. But for me, you know, it was a story that I felt like was, and still is, timely. At the time we were dealing with critical race theory, if you remember that moment in time, where that was very much the topic at hand of like, should we be teaching Black history, and like what kind of Black history should we be teaching? And now we're in the DEI era, where it's like, you know, should people even be in these positions? But I think, you know, Black history is such an important part of not only, you know, American history, but I think there's so many incredible stories that we don't know about. You know, people aren't exposed to them. And so finding a way to do that through comics was important to me, and it kind of feels like an extension of the ideas and the ethos behind Milestone. So that's my part of the story.
Yeah, the whole attempting to reframe historical events so that they don't make American history look so dark and bleak is fascinating to me. I'm like, what? It happened. It made
Yeah.
this country who we are. Why are you trying to erase it? Doesn't make any sense.
Well, and you
I'm
look
like,
at a bunch of other countries where like they don't hide that. You know what I mean? Even if it is painful, it is part of the history, and like they make sure that people remember that, because like that's how you don't repeat certain incidents again. And so, America is very, very interesting in the way that we like to kind of not even just gloss over certain things, but in that continued kind of like pushing aside of a lot of the things, not just things that happen to Black people, but just a lot of people. You know what I mean?
uh,
And not facing those things, I think, is why we're in a lot of the
a-
situations we are today.
and one friend of mine put it in such a hilarious form. I can't believe he actually said it. He said it's like America is trying to like do a glow up and impress a younger girl. I'm like, what? What?
I feel
So
it.
it's like it fits, it fits, but it's kind of crazy. Uh,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
Adigan, talk about how you got involved with Milestone and approached this story.
How so? I was working on a project for Scout Comics, and my writer friend there, we had this co-creator on the book, and he texted me, "Hey man, this DC Milestone Initiative competition is happening. Are you submitting your stuff there?" And I'm like, I didn't hear anything about that. What's going on? I checked the website. It had like 5 days left to submit. So I just, quickly whipped up three interior pages, wrote the artist statements, etc. Applied. Fortunately, got picked up, and I after that had built this amazing network of friends, peers, you know, um, colleagues through initiative program. We are, have this very tightly knit relationship with our cohorts. Also, like we're very connected to editors, people at DC in general. You know, um, so that ecosystem really helped us a lot in terms of finding our own community ground within the industry that empowers the things we wanted to tell, our voice. And they all brought in together for my experience, as Jordan reached out to me about this book, and it clicked so much for me because I'm an international, but I came here, of course, as an immigrant, understanding the cultural fabric here for everybody, like trying to understand everybody's history behind, and simultaneously working for artist Kerime Weems. And her work is deeply involved in, you know, picking these ancestral connections, your historical connections background, and making something contemporary, whether it's video art or an installation design, you name it. As I also attending Syracuse University, in at which my professor Frank Cumuso, was the creative CEO of the Ahoy Comics. So when Jordan reached out to me, this was a perfect moment to really having that next step, like next step in terms of comics, yes, but also like a cultural progression of my experience in this country. And we had amazing experience working on this comics, but we'll get to that later.
So talk about the collaboration. How did you guys break down the story? I'm guessing Jordan had at least the first issue uh, already scripted before we, give it to Atagun and say, "Hey, what do you see when you read this?"
Yeah, I mean, I think, for us, fortunately, it being a creator-owned book, the schedule, we still had deadlines and things that we had to meet, but it wasn't necessarily as tight as, say, like, a mainstream DC comic. And so, initially, we had some time to just kind of talk and work some things out. And, I was sending out again a lot of different visual inspirations, and we kind of would go back and forth about what we would think, characters would look like or situations would look like. But fortunately, I also think that we just have like a good creative connection naturally. And so Adigan would kind of come back with stuff and things that we hadn't really had too much time to talk about, but it would be like exactly what I was thinking in my mind. So it was kind of like really nice to always, have somebody that you trust, in terms of, their creative instincts, because I think, you know, everybody's relationships are different, creatively. I mean, obviously there's some people who are very much just like they like it one way and they want to see it one way. Other people who are very much just like do whatever you want. And I think for me and Adigan, it's a little bit of the in between, just because clearly we're dealing with, in this book, historical figures and real people, and so we want to treat them with respect and we want to be able to accurately represent them. But also it's Afrofuturism, it's fantasy, it's science fiction. Like there's a lot of room for creativity and expression. And so I never want to kind of inhibit or stop my creative partner from following their instincts and whatever is kind of calling to them. So there were things, for example, like Petunia the panda, like wasn't in the script originally. It was something that Adigan added, and I was like, this is great, like let's just keep finding ways to kind of like make this bigger and weirder. There are also just like some visual things, like for the main antagonist, Mitchell Evans, the AI. Like, I said Adigan like some visual references, but what he came back with was like, wow, like that's incredible. And then like, again, certain things he would just kind of add on to. So I feel like the collaboration was just very natural back and forth, because like that's just how I prefer to work. Like I never want to feel like I'm anybody's like boss or taskmaster, as much as like we're both equals. And again, creator owned, creator shared, book. So this is as much Adigan's book as it is my book. And I never wanted it to feel like, I wrote it in the script, so you got to do it that way, as much as it's like the script is, a roadmap, and there's always room for discussion and ways to add stuff. So what do you think, Adigan? How do you feel?
Um, Having this a creator owned book is very important, because when it's creator owned book, you usually work at your own pace, and you actually come to agreement with the writer beforehand. You pitch the projects, so you already know the dynamics behind the team, right? So there's sense of trust and reliability already have established. And of course, working with Jordan and knowing him before the milestone, knowing him at the initiative program, uh, you know, it's you can tell from a character that you'll match, you'll jibe well with the character. Therefore, sharing ideas, working on ideas on project, and sometimes it gets so personal that you want to kind of, there's a feeling of like, this is my project or this is your project, what is going on. When that kind of impulses cleared out, there's none of that, and clearly characters are clicking. And in this case, we most certainly did. I knew, taking on this project will be a very creative journey, very um, a kind of like a self-reflective, creative, in your own time kind of project, and it turned out that way. So we, like Jordan said, we didn't get hit by immediate deadlines or whatever. And Sarah, our editor, was so great, was so accommodating in that term. She gave me a lot of time because at the time I was also, doing my master thesis, trying to graduate, doing all that stuff. And um, given that time, which was 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
this book, each issue I've gotten better in terms of like artist, being an artist, also like having that personal growth, and that all reflected on each issue. Topping that off with the final issue, I felt like everything about me as an artist, and being a master's student, MFA student in United States, they all came brought in together. Um, and in that process, Jordan was also amazing by giving me the room, an extra room, and a lot of opportunities to work on characters, do my own, think about these characters, and have my own input. So there was plenty of space given to me as an artist, and we essentially ultimately created a great characters, a great story, and some of them came uh, came into fruition along the way. Wasn't
Mm-hmm.
from the get go. So that back and forth, healthy dialogue, that conversation, the creative push and pull, had let us create, like you said, our panda, and our villain, right? And in that time, I was thinking about these spaces that they will be in. Like it's a sci-fi, but it's like Afrofuturism, a lot of like elements blending in together. So having this beautiful dialogue helped me a lot, and giving space and time to really establish the tone of the book every issue. You know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And so how was the back and forth when you were discussing the character designs? Like what's Melvin gonna look like? How is he gonna move? What's Myron gonna look like? How is he gonna move? What's
Mhm.
the look of some of the, I don't want to spoil it too much, but there's like an alternate universe, an alternate setting, I guess.
Mhm.
How how was it going back and forth? I mean, were you what tools were you using? Because you've got a deadline to meet, but
Yeah.
you also can't spend like 3 days redrawing a character. So how did that work for both of you?
Well, designing characters for the book is very delicate, because like writer has a vision for the story, for the characters, like a core vision, core idea about what they represent. So you don't want to really mess that up. What you want to do as an artist to amplify that voice, and bring your own um, experience as an artist, as a human, right? On top of what is that core idea about. So for me, designing character, it's all about that principle. So when Jordan, brought these character ideas, I wanted to create distinctive shapes for each character, so they would have like distinctive silhouettes. So when you look at them close up or in distance, you will really tell, you know. Um, by the hair, the beard, it fades, it gets like whiter on the tip, it gets darker towards the hairline. That actually, little stuff like that, amplifying not only the silhouette and visual tone, but also the cultural aspect of what these characters represent. were the main focal point of me amplifying his voice, right? Um, and the back and forth thing was like very easy, very like we had fun, me
Mhm.
sending sketches, he, you know, bringing his own ideas, his own feedback, and that clicks some different kind of creative energy in my brain. So I come back with, um, you know, better character designs or very more understood design about these characters. Because the more back and forth you do, the more brainstorm you do, you understand the facet of the story better. Um, so yeah, all in all, it was like that and very fun. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, well, and for me as a writer, I have the understanding that the artist is going to have to draw these characters over and over and over and over and over again. And so, like, coming in and being like, yeah, he's got like 7 rings and like, 4 chains and like, these costumes and these different, and it's like, I don't want to overwhelm somebody in that way, but also again, like allowing some expression and some ability to, bring an artist's individual voice to things because, we had talked before and Adigan had done a bunch of superhero stuff before he was jumping onto this. He was finishing up like a run on Poison Ivy. And so, he was saying, oh, it'd be nice to do something a little bit looser, maybe something a little bit more like manga inspired. And so, I wanted to lean into that and kind of follow, his lead in his direction just because um again, wanting to still maintain some of the things that I was seeing in my head, or even just like the general feel of the characters. Like, I don't know how much this helped you, but I always like to do a little playlist for the projects that I'm working on. So I send them like some music and like some things to just kind of like have in back of mind when working on stuff. And hopefully it's kind of stuff that stays with you, even if um you're thinking about something, or trying to find individual notes and feelings about characters, because even somebody like June, Melvin's wife, we wanted her to feel and look a certain way that's distinct, but also her and Melvin need to go together, right? Like they need to feel like a unit when they're together. So a lot of like little details that we were trying to figure out and work on. Because yeah, like once we were deep into the project, we had a couple of conversations that we would kind of go back and forth, and Adigan would send me notes and stuff, but we weren't speaking as regularly as we were in the beginning. But I think the conversations and things that we did before jumping into the project really helped carry us through, because once you kind of have that shorthand, you're able to kind of just either, again, he could kind of guess maybe what I was thinking or what I was looking for, and I could kind of guess from the work that he had been doing, kind of what would be fun for him. And so, I threw a lot at him. I threw robot dogs and horses and car chases and martial arts and all kinds of stuff. And I think he was definitely game to roll with everything that I was putting into the script.
Nice. So it sounds like you guys had a lot of fun working on this title. Is there more to this story beyond the 5 issues that we've already have, or is there a different adventure on the books for you two to work on?
See, now you're asking the big questions. We've talked about it, and like, I mean, Adigan has even kind of like sketched out some different things, possibilities for the future. And I think absolutely we would love to do more. Part of it is people got to buy the book. That's kind of how a lot of it goes. Is the more support and like feeling that people definitely want to see continuing adventures, I think makes it easier for Hawaii to say, oh, okay, yeah, absolutely. But we've talked about it, and we definitely have stuff that we'd like to do. But we've also talked about some other projects and some other ideas because I would love to work with Atagun as much as possible. So anything that we could put together, whether it's more ancestral recall or whether it's something a little bit different, like I'm definitely down to do it.
Yeah. If you read the book, you'll see that we left the door open.
Hmm.
The end of the end of the book, of course, intentionally, and that we would definitely, as it's our intention, we definitely would like to push forward the story into different fields, and branch this out to different storylines would be amazing, because the story itself is very provides a lot of ground to explore that thing, because you have AI thing, and when we first started the story, AI wasn't as heavy as an idea,
Yeah.
right? But then you work on the story, you do these brainstorming, and you realize also, like, you can look around the world, this thing is right now um, you know taking over the world, and blending these things together. Why not be incorporate AI into our story, have something more and more contemporary to say, um, to the world.
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, me
yeah,
and Atigun talked about it because each issue that came out will kind of be like something in the world would happen, and we look at each other and be like, "Did we do that?" Because that's like right out of the book. Like I think maybe after the second issue came out, I found this ad for like this AI panda that was like going around on social media. That was like
right.
the ad was fully AI, so it looked like, oh, like this real animatronic panda, and then people would get it, and it would just be like a cheap toy, but like the idea behind it was like exactly what we were kind of talking about. So I hope we can use those powers for good. If there's some powers that we do have.
Yeah,
But there's also just so many stories that I feel like I would love to tell, not only in this world but just through the idea of ancestral recall, because a lot of the historical figures that we chose, chose for a reason, just because they fit into some of the story beats that we were looking for. But there are also a bunch of other people that I had to leave out just because I didn't want the book to feel too crowded, and also it was kind of like, how do I work an acrobat into this, or how do I work like somebody who maybe doesn't have a skill that felt needed or necessary to the story. But I've got a whole list of people that I would love to figure out a way to link Melvin to, and continue the adventure. So I think we've talked about it. We definitely have ideas.
yeah. And I want to also say this about the book: this beautiful contrast between computer, AI, and mathematics, and soul of human. Like, that's
Hmm.
the heart, the biggest contrast sitting at the heart of this book, um, and that is very prevalent. Will
Hmm.
be also prevalent in future, um, about what humans represent in this life. Right? Do we What are we bringing into this world as our own value? Are we bringing more tools that utilize stuff, or we're bringing our, experts, are just the things we create out of our own soul and heart, right? So these two things really clash in the book. So that's why it's so personal and therefore so universal.
Hmm.
Also, it provides a lot of, like, opportunities, because we have so many figures that we can also introduce in the following book, if there's any opportunity. um, you know Shout out to Ahoy. And also, that depends on, like, the sale numbers, realistically, how
Right.
the book is doing. Will there be any other publisher interested in continuing some relevant story, or any we have where Jordan already made a list of project ideas, that I went through, and every single item is so interesting. So it's gonna be a hard time to pick one. However, we're definitely we're pushing this, and we're pushing our creative collaboration forward.
It sounds like we need to get some grassroots instigation going.
Hey, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay, top of my list to call Ahoy. So are you guys working on anything now that you can talk about, either together or separately?
Atagun, what you got going on?
I have some creator-owned projects going on. Nothing like Big Two related so far. Just finished, not just, but a few months ago, finished Poison Ivy, issue 36 and 37. And after it, basically, you wait for the next project that will come out of Ether from DC Comics. And in the meantime, I'm working on one book that we're set up to release, late July, August, and it's about the Trojan War saga. So I'm currently working on that, and nothing extra so far.
Yeah, I've got a few fun anthology stories coming out from a publisher around like July, August. So I think that'll probably be announced sometime soon. And then just continuing to work on individual projects. I've got some things that I want to do, Patreon related and maybe Kickstarter related. And then, me and Atagun are going to get together and talk about some stuff, a little bit later in the spring, summertime. So we'll see. Hopefully, definitely more comics coming from both of us. But, hopefully, more comics also coming from us together as a team.
Nice. Do you guys have like websites or social media people can follow to keep up, keep track of what you guys got coming up next?
Yeah. Google me. Atagun Ílhan. You'll see my website, Instagram, and Twitter.
Nice.
And I'm on all the socials at JRSosa18, JRSOSA18.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, Atagun, thank you so much for sharing your creative and collaborative process. The book is Ancestral Recall. The collected trade paperback edition is out now from Ahoy Comics at your favorite comics retailers. Again, gentlemen, and Jordan's cat, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
And we'll be back with more Slice of Sci-Fi right after this. Hey, this is Summer, and I'd like to remind everybody about the Star Trek book I co-edited, Women Take the Con, an unauthorized Star Trek essay collection by women writers about the women of Star Trek, the original series. And I'm really proud of this. Hope you guys go check it out. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. The link is right here. My co-editor, Rich Handley, was instrumental in pulling all of the elements for this book together. And we are really proud of this book. So if you are a fan of Star Trek, the original series, support us. Check it out. I thank you. Rich thanks you. Star Trek fans, thank you.
Slice of Sci-Fi.